To today's video. Today is Sunday, September 21st, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Atlas Intel's most recent national poll that they released pertaining to the 2026 midterm elections. If you don't know Atlas Intel, you really should. In the 2020 election, they were deemed the most accurate pollster of that cycle, getting within just 0.2% of the final margin, as they predicted President Biden would win his election against Donald Trump by 4.7% on the national popular vote, to which they were correct, as Biden did go on to win it by 4.5%. Atlas Intel really struck gold in 2020, but we were a bit apprehensive about it. I will admit, I was the first one to say that looking at it on a list compared to a lot of other polling agencies, they didn't release as much data. They didn't release as much of their methodology, and it was really kind of hard to see if the 2020 election should be seen as this overall gold standard, given that it was a very weird time. It was the COVID-19 pandemic. We had high-quality pollsters missing the mark by high degrees in both left and right directions. It was very interesting, but Atlas Intel was certainly on my radar after 2020, but I was a bit apprehensive to say that it was going to be most accurate again in 2024. That is an extremely hard metric. But then they did it again, and I kid you not, they were nearly spot on in the 2024 cycle, showing that in the second time around, what they said in the last cycle, in the last election, 2024, Trump would win the national popular vote by 1.2%. He won by 1.5%. And so them, as you know, as a pollster, predicted accurately that Biden would win by 4.7. He won by 4.5. Said Trump would win by 1.2. He won by 1.5. The overall average error here is a Democratic bias of 0.2%. You heard that correctly. 0.16% if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty. So what are they telling us about the national environment? What are they telling us about the midterms? Well, you can already tell from the title of this video. But let's take a look. Let's just go ahead and jump down to that page. They do a lot of things. They tell you, who they're talking to. They're looking at, just generally speaking, a bunch of different points. But what we can actually find, there's a lot of questions here, so we're going to have to jump by it, is the generic ballot in the 2026 midterm elections. For a bit of context, the midterm elections are often decided by the generic ballot, meaning that voters are given that question from across the country. If you had the choice between a Democrat and a Republican in your race, it doesn't individualize, but it does ask, Democrat and Republican in your congressional district, how are you voting? Well, if we look at previous elections, let's talk about what the generic ballot looked like then. In 2024, Republicans won the national popular vote in the House by roughly 3 points. It was a margin, actually not exactly 3 points, but you were at a point where it was 2.6%, pretty notable and in favor of the GOP. In 2022, it was nearly an identical margin here, 2.7% in terms of the GOP advantage. In 2020, Democrats won that popular vote against the Republicans by a margin of 3.1%. So you get the gist here, that the generic ballot often leads. Slight advantage for Democrats in 2020. They win the House. Republicans swing the environment by 6 points. They win the House in 2024. Gets slightly more, Democratic, but barely though, 2.6 versus 2.7, and they're still losing. The Republicans win the House. Looking at what they say for 2026, the reason I braced for impact here is because they are predicting, a pretty notable amount. This is what the generic ballot final numbers actually say here. Democrats win 52% of the vote to the Republicans 44%. And when broken down by independents, Democrats win 63-28. By voters who did not vote in the last cycle, 62-7. Young voters, middle-aged voters, all demographics here are leaning towards the Democratic Party. And again, most accurate pollster in 2020, most accurate pollster in 2024. And looking at the most recent ratings from Nate Silver, they're one of the few polls in the country that give that are given an A+ rating, with 91 polls being tested by this average here. An A+ rating. And they're telling us it's not so great for the Republican Party. Looking at this demographic breakdown, even amongst men, which was notoriously bad for Democrats in 2024, they are doing well in, according to this data, right? Looking at that independent vote split, that is massive. And thinking about those who voted in the last cycle, 11% of Donald Trump's voters are voting for Democrats in 2026. Just 1% of Kamala Harris voters are voting for Republicans in 2026. And that actually very well may be just Liz Cheney and her father, right? And that's obviously a joke. But the point here, very seriously, is that that's a very small amount. Looking at it, at the 11%, that is 1 out of 10 Trump voters. And again, I'm not here to say one poll to rule them all, right? This is not Lord of the Rings. I do think that we are in a position, though, where we can take the most accurate pollster from 2020 and 2024 and say, wait a second, what are you saying? What exactly are you providing us in terms of, accuracy, and are you right? Have you been right? Because a lot of these national polls that have been pushed by Fox News, pushed by the right, even the left too, oftentimes are not tried and tested polls, and in some cases, they're C or D rated pollsters who have no rhyme or reason for the things that they do. Remember Trafalgar? Everybody said, wait a second, this is the most accurate pollster ever, until Democrats won. And then it didn't become accurate, right? Because their polls were just saying GOP, GOP, GOP. Half, every other election, you're going to be right. But for this case, Atlas Intel went with Biden strong. They were right. They went with Trump strong. They were right. They were one of the few pollsters, too, that had Trump up on the national stage and on the national popular vote because people didn't believe that. They didn't believe that he would win the popular vote. And honestly, I didn't either. I mean, that election caught, I think, a lot of us by surprise. Not necessarily that, there was this election that was close, 50-50 odds, somebody was going to win it. But Democrats hadn't lost the popular vote since 2004 and only once in the 21st century, 2004. And then it happened again in 2024. Maybe it's the fours that's unlucky for the Democratic Party. But on a very serious note here, Atlas Intel's data is tremendously bad for the Republican Party. I mean, I look at this and I say, what in the world, does the map look like in this hypothetical? Well, lucky for us, we have map.jacksonjew.com, not a promotional video. I put it in the description box down below for a reason, though. You should check it out. It's a phenomenal tool. And what it tells us and what we can actually use it for is for circumstances like this. So what I want to do is press the wrong thing. But what I want to do is take a look at the 2024 House election results and swing it to a national environment where Democrats are winning by 8.3%. So remember, for context, Democrats lost the popular vote here, 49.8 to 47.2, a 2.6% margin. Democrats, in theory, according to Atlas Intel, are winning the popular vote by 8.3%. And that non-voting number for 2024, we'll talk about it more in depth tomorrow. We've seen it pretty consistently in a lot of data points, is really alarming for the GOP because Democrats are clearly getting people out to vote who didn't feel like they needed to in 2026. We actually saw that in 2018. We saw it in 2020. 2020 was the highest turnout we had seen since before the sinking of the Titanic. The last time we saw an election with high enough turnout that compared to 2020 was in 1900, not the century, but the actual year 1900. And so obviously a lot more people. 2024 was slightly lower turnout than 2020. But again, getting back to this point about what the popular vote looked like, 2.6% for the GOP. Democrats would win it by 8.3%. And so what that swing is a 10.9% swing on the map here. And so to visually show you what that looks like, we can do it here, swinging in favor of the Democrats by 10.9%. The map looks like this. Democrats would win 6 more seats than they did in 2018, and they would be at 241 across the country. Now, take out Texas, they're down to 236. Still 1 seat more than 2018, but combat it with California, you're back up. Okay, draw out Missouri and Indiana, but then Utah might have 2 more seats for the Democrats. Now you're back up. So obviously, a lot that can change on the map here. But what we're looking at right now is that the Democrats at 241, that's what this map is predicting. An even more impressive victory for the Democrats than in 2018 when they saw 76% of all of the districts in the country swing over 15 points towards the Democratic Party. That is what Atlas Intel is telling us, and that's why it should be screaming, from the rooftops towards the RNC that you are sleepwalking into a disaster of a midterm election. Democrats have never been this up in recent memory. 2018 is probably the last time you will find that they have been remarkably doing well. Not in 2020. Yes, they won the trifecta, but they lost 10 seats in the House. Not in 2022 when they lost the House. Not in 2024 when they lost the Senate. 2026 will very much be that year, and it's because Trump is unpopular. It's because Trump voters are not motivated to get out and vote in the same way they were when he's on the ballot, the same way they never have been when he's not on the ballot. That's why every special election, regardless of who's president, Democrats still do well in. Because the motivational factor for the GOP, for a party that revolves around a personality rather than a principle. And I don't say that to knock it. I say it to be very real that Donald Trump is the driving factor, right? It's not on the Democratic side. It's not Kamala Harris. It's not Joe Biden. It's not Barack Obama. It is not one person. Even when it was Biden as president, he was not dictating and setting mandate. He was not endorsing in, the West Virginia 2nd District in the primary and making that decision as the incumbent president, unlike Trump, who is very hands-on in every race, is referenced in campaigns everywhere. Safe blue states, safe red states, swing districts, non-swing districts, does things because he has near total control over that Republican Party. And that's why there is that vote issue when it comes down to who's willing to turn out and why, because it is Donald Trump who is that motivational factor. And that's why you see that, when you're looking at the 2024 cycle, you're looking at what is really driving, Democrats to do so well. It oftentimes is those who said, I didn't vote. It is oftentimes those who say, I did not vote in the last cycle, but I will be this time, and I will choose the Democrats 62% to 7, with 21% who call themselves undecided. I mean, it is truly, truly, truly a fascinating position. And it is one that has been driving the Democratic Party's numbers up. And when it comes down to who they trust more voters, on the environment, it's Democrats. On education, it's Democrats. Healthcare, economic inequality, democracy. Even trade and tariffs. It was a huge thing for Trump in 24. If you were to ask this question in 24, he would have beaten Kamala Harris by 10 points. On some other issues, sure. Crime and immigration, defense, Republicans are up on that one. But that doesn't seem to be what is driving the voters, towards the Democratic Party. It is not someone who says, immigration, I think Trump is doing a good job, so now I'm going to vote for Democrats. That obviously doesn't make sense. But in a lot of these issues, for instance, that Trump and Republicans would blow Democrats out of the water in, it is the most standard, civic, any civics class you take. In high school, in middle school, you will learn the standard stereotype here that Democrats are often seen as better for the environment, climate change, healthcare, abortion rights. Republicans are known for the economy. They're known for business. They're known for lower taxes, smaller government, right? And it is those issues that they would trounce Democrats in. 15, 20 points. There are plenty of Democrats out there that will be the first to say, I might think Trump might be better for the economy, but I don't think that's an issue that, is going to be the only thing informing my choice, right? There were voters out there, but when you looked at it, those who ranked the economy as the number one choice chose Trump 80-19, right? In the last election. That is fact. CNN exit poll, everyone, Pew Research, anyone, anywhere you look, you will find it. When it comes down to this issue right now, Donald Trump and the Republicans are not doing so well. On inflation and the cost of living, Republicans have that advantage by just 2. On taxes, just 3. These are things they should be blowing out of the water, and that is the big reason. Because there's hesitancy to trust Republicans on the economy, which they have historically always been the favorites when asked on that issue, even in times where the economy is good under Democrats. It is Republicans who find themselves still being seen as this beneficial party, whether it is true or not. Because every recession has happened under a Republican president in recent memory. When you take a look at the way voters have engaged with it in the past, it is very different than it is today. And that is why this most accurate pollster from the 2020 cycle and the 2024 cycle is saying Democrats are in this position. And while they might have that, factor here where a lot can change between now and November of 2026, this is a huge warning sign for the GOP. And I think it really does show that the Republicans are not going to be in as hot of a position as they would hope to be. Even with all these efforts to redraw, and it is so painstakingly obvious, and I want you to walk with me on this one, because I think it actually has become way more apparent that, yes, it was always that, Trump wanted to exert his power over the Republicans in the legislatures, have them draw the maps so they could, hold on to seats here because they felt like they had a fighting chance. I think it is far worse than that when it comes down to the internal deliberations. I think they know they lost the House. And this is all about mitigating any type of, overwhelming Democratic majority where if they have 5 blue dogs who will side with the Republicans on whatever it might be, it would be enough to stop a Democratic majority, which is why in Texas, they're going for 5 seats. They want Florida to do it, but we'll see if that happens. They've already done it in Missouri. They're about to do it in Indiana. Ohio's set to redraw as well. There's a reason why they do these things, because they are trying, their damn best to mitigate the disaster that is about to come upon them. And they listen to Atlas Intel. They listen to these polls, right? I think unlike the first administration, this admin is extremely attuned to, I think, the political implications. The problem is that the president of the United States has no more elections left to run in, right? Save a 2028 bid, which I think is all flirtation for the purpose of getting the media to focus on things other than what's happening at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I do think they know that the Democrats are on track to win the House. So trying to stifle that majority is a big focus of theirs, and they see these numbers too. Because I can guarantee you there's a paid staff member on the Team Trump side or whatever it might be that is paid to track these numbers and is getting that memo up to Susie Wiles, who's getting it to the president, to say, Republicans are not in a great position. Behind closed doors, they know that there's this impending doom that is reaching them at the ballot box. And what we have seen thus far from Atlas and every other source of information on this, when it comes down to fundraising, when it comes down to special elections, when it comes down to other data points too, when it comes down to early voting numbers that we're seeing, the numbers here are not great for the Republican Party, and they know it. And so Democrats being up by 8 points, I'm not shocked. And what I do think it tells us is that Democrats are in a position where the most accurate pollster from 2020 and 2024 is pretty much reading everything else that we can see, which is that Democrats are in a very strong position for the 2026 cycle, and they are catching on to it early. And what a map looks like? Well, Democrats would be in a very good position when it comes down to it if that map holds. Obviously, a lot can change between now and November of 2026, but as it stands today, The map here looks a lot better for Democrats than you think. And looking at Atlas Intel, who has called it right twice, I'm not saying they are the end-all be-all, but they certainly provide a very interesting perspective on the race and one that is worth looking at. And right now, that puts the Democrats up 241 to 194 if this map was to translate, with potentially an opportunity for even more growth. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.